We worked very hard at first to create what I would call a fail-safe environment where students feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and keep going. And that's really a powerful mindset for young people to develop because it teaches them resilience and problem solving. And I think that after school space gives them the freedom to be able to fail safe.
Hello, I'm your host, Karen Horting, Executive Director and CEO of the Society of Women Engineers. Welcome to Diverse, a SWE podcast. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Chris Moore, the CEO of FIRST. FIRST is the world's leading youth robotics community that gives young people the skills, confidence, and resilience to build a better world. I also have the privilege of serving on the FIRST board of directors, which makes this podcast extremely special to me because I have seen the power of the FIRST community. So, Chris, it's always great to connect, especially coming off the energy of another incredible FIRST championship in Houston. So welcome to Diverse.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm happy to be here.
As I said, we are happy to have you. So our listeners always kind of like to hear a little bit more about our guests and maybe what drew you to this work. So can you share a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your background and ultimately what led you to FIRST?
Sure. And thanks for that question. So for most of my career, there has been what I would describe as one consistent through line. And that through line was youth development. So whether it was through youth sports, leadership roles that I've held in both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, or now through my experience at FIRST, I've always been drawn to environments that help young people discover who they are and what they're capable of becoming. And so what I've realized over time is that sports and FIRST actually have a lot in common. On the surface, they may look different. If you've ever been to a FIRST championship, either regionally or our national championship, they may look different, but both create spaces where young people find confidence, they find identity, teamwork, a sense of belonging, agency, and purpose. And so in both traditional sports and FIRST, you see students pushed outside their comfort zones. They solve problems together, they learn resilience, they discover their strengths and passions that they didn't even know they had. And honestly, that's what drew me so strongly to FIRST. Sometimes I think we as adults have been telling ourselves the wrong story about this generation of young people. For years, we believed that our job was to teach kids how to innovate and how to think innovatively. But in reality, this generation does not really need to be taught how to innovate. They're already doing it. They're growing up immersed in technology. They are instinctively forward-looking. They're willing to experiment. They build, they create, and they adapt in ways we're still trying to fully understand. The issue isn't capability, it's opportunity. And too many young people simply never get that chance to discover what they're capable of. And that's really what makes the work that we do at FIRST so powerful to me. It gives students hands-on opportunities to build something real, to solve real problems, work as a team. And that's what keeps me inspired about this work.
Yeah, I love when you talk about the opportunity because I think that's what's so powerful about programs like FIRST, the SWE Next program we have here at SWE. The innovation part, the coming up with great ideas, this generation has got it. But having the opportunity to do something meaningful and to see that they have a place where this can really be a career for them, I think is why the programs are so important.
100%. I think it's really about opportunity and access. And as I said, many young people just never really get the opportunity to discover what they're capable of until they are given the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, we had a SWE Next meetup at the championships, and one of the teams that was there, they're a SWE Next club, and they're also a FIRST team. And they were talking about some of the research they're doing in partnership with a local university in the Philadelphia area and having to do with weather balloons and data capture and and all these sorts of things, where when the young woman got done explaining it to me, I looked at my colleague and I said, I understood weather balloon. And this is a junior in high school. And I just think, like, this generation is so far ahead in terms of their ability to explore and innovate. And we just need to give them the pathways to do it.
I agree. And, as I've walked our championship hall and interact with the youngest of our participants, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and when they're using terms like iterate and innovation, it just brings a smile to my face. In fact, there are times where I feel like I'm not as smart as they are, because they are truly imaginative in their thinking. They're very innovative. They are well coached and well mentored. And it's just such a joy to see the bright futures that many of these young people have ahead of them.
Yeah, every time I'm there at championships, and my husband has joined me many times, and we'll be walking through the halls or going through the pits, and we'll talk about how sort of the younger generations are maligned a bit. And I'm like, anybody who thinks we're in trouble really just needs to come to this one time, and they will feel like we are in the best hands possible.
I could not agree more.
We were talking with one of the SWE groups as well, and they were talking about mentoring some of the younger students and how they were creating experiential learning for the younger kids. And I was like, oh my God, I think we have classroom folks who don't even know how to create experiential learning.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think today students, they need more than knowledge. They, as we talked about, they need opportunity to design, build, solve the most vexing of problems that our country faces. But part of the challenge is resources, right? Funding and support have just not kept pace with what's required to deliver these kinds of experiences at scale. And just too little of it reaches the classroom in ways that enable these students to get hands-on real-world learning. So that's why organizations like FIRST exists, right, to provide those opportunities for young people. And we need really an ecosystem of partner organizations to help bring that to life.
Yeah. So I want to dig in, because I know FIRST operates in the classroom setting, but a lot of it is in an after-school setting. So is there something about that after-school environment that just connects differently than a traditional setting?
Yeah, I think classroom learning and after-school learning each play incredibly important roles, but there's just something unique that happens in the after school space that can be really transformative for young people. After school often creates a different kind of freedom, and students feel more ownership. They have more room to experiment, collaborate, create, and even take risks without the pressure of receiving a grade or getting something right or taking a test. And that, I think, matters because innovation rarely happens in a linear, straight line. In FIRST, students are constantly iterating. They build something, they test it, they realize it didn't work, they rethink it, they improve it, they then try it again. And so we always talk about failure as not being the opposite of success, but rather failure is part of success. And failure is not something to avoid, it's actually part of the learning process. And so we work very hard at FIRST to create what I would call a fail-safe environment where students feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, and keep going. And that's really a powerful mindset for young people to develop because it teaches them resilience and problem solving. And I think that after school space gives them the freedom to be able to fail safe. And that's what I also love about FIRST is that students quickly realize there are many ways to test and iterate and fail safely and then ultimately become successful.
Yeah, I think so much now is about perfection. Rarely does anything happen in science and engineering the first time, right? Sometimes it's hundreds of times. But as you said, it's how do you take that failure? Okay, it didn't work. What did we learn? How do we adapt? How do we iterate? And I think when you learn to do that quickly and keep going, that's when you're going to see the success.
That's right. And I think organizations like FIRST and SWE are especially powerful because we're not just teaching skills, we're helping students see possible futures for themselves. And we're providing mentorship and role models in community and exposure to these pathways that students may never have imagined before.
Yeah, I think it really is about helping them develop that STEM identity, right? Seeing that they have a place and you don't have to be the best in order to be successful.
That's exactly right.
I know at first you like to say it's the one sport where everyone can go pro, correct?
Yeah, it's not just a statement. We truly believe it because when you think about that sort of parallel between sports and first, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that sports and STEM programs like first kind of sit on opposite ends of the student experience, when in reality, they create many of the same types of emotional outcomes. And both first and sports, students build confidence, they build teamwork, resilience, discipline. And honestly, when you walk into a first competition, it feels a lot like walking into a sporting event, right? You attend the first championship where, 2 weeks ago, we descended on the city of Houston with over 51,000 participants, attendees, family members. It gave this energy and excitement of a World Cup or a Super Bowl. There's strategy, there's teamwork, there's joy of victory, and students are learning how to recover from setbacks and come back stronger. And that process is incredibly powerful for young people. What I've learned during my years in youth sports is that growth rarely happens all at once. It happens through repetition, through coaching, through mentorship, through encouragement and shared experiences with teammates. And that's what happens when you attend a first competition or when you are part of a first competition. Students are not only building confidence, but they're also solving real world problems and they're contributing to a team. And we often say, as you noted, that first is a sport of the mind, and it's where every young person can go pro. Because the last time we checked, there aren't 2 to 3 million available jobs in the NBA or the MLB or the NFL, right? But in our sport, the sport of robotics and hands-on STEM learning, there are many available jobs for young people. Not every young person sees themselves on a traditional athletic field, but they may absolutely see themselves designing, coding, building, innovating, or leading a robotics team. And so for some students, this is the first place where they truly feel seen for their strengths.
Yeah. Well, I happened to be in Houston once when the World Series was going on, and now I've been there many times during first. And I have to say, I think the energy during first is stronger than when I happened to be there when the World Series was going on. I mean, it's like you walk around that downtown area and there's students that are competing, there's parents, there's the mentors, there's all of the sponsors. It's just an incredible atmosphere.
It truly is. And I would probably liken it more to a World Cup. And I say that because, World Cup, there tends to be teams and, fans, participants from different countries. And at the first championship 2 weeks ago, we hosted students and families from 59 countries. And what's also just fascinating is that first intentionally borrowed many elements from traditional sports. So, for example, every year, students work through a short but intense season where teams design and build their robots for competition. They compete locally, regionally, and then they advance to the first championship. And then they experience, as we're saying, the excitement of the crowds, the mascots, the cheering sections. Then, of course, there are the trophies and the awards. And so students through first, they design robots that shoot basketballs, throw frisbees, score goals, stack game pieces, and solve strategic challenges with real-time scoring systems. And so you don't often know who won until the final buzzer sounds. But that was the vision that we created. We wanted to create a sport where science and technology could feel every bit as exciting as hitting a game-winning shot on the basketball court or scoring a touchdown on the football field, while also opening doors to future careers and opportunities for these young people.
Yeah, I would say the excitement that you see, the costumes, the mascots. When I got there 2 weeks ago, I was greeted by a team walking around with an avocado. I'm like, avocado. Okay. I think we've got a team from California or Mexico here.
Interesting. I don't think I saw that.
But I mean, it's the parents, it's the mentors, the coaches, other students from their schools who are there to cheer them on. It's just such a supportive community. And I think the first time I came to First, that's what I was struck by the most, was that camaraderie. That even if it's not just the camaraderie on my team, it's another team needs support and our team's going to help out. It's really that gracious professionalism that I think really sets First apart from other organizations.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. As one who have been affiliated with youth sports for many years, I must say that First teams, and not just the teams, honestly, First employees, the mentors, the volunteers who, by the way, we couldn't even successfully execute our season without volunteers. They all practice what we call gracious professionalism, which is this, it's almost like a code of ethics that everyone affiliated with the entirety of our ecosystem subscribes to, which is this sense that you're going to help other teams, you're going to help one another. It's part of one of our core values or our ethos. And you don't really see that as much in traditional sports. Look no further than youth baseball tournament where parents are fighting with other parents or fighting with the officials or two coaches are fighting. At First, we rise above that through this gracious professional conduct that we hold ourselves to and we hold all of our participants to as well.
Yeah, and talk about setting a positive example.
Exactly.
So important for our youth.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, maybe talk a little bit about mentors, role models, volunteers, so critical to the work we do at SWE as well in our outreach activities. You just have to walk the halls of the convention center at First to see that as well. And so what is kind of your message maybe to somebody who's thinking, oh, I'm not qualified to do that, or, oh, kids wouldn't want to hear from me, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, first of all, mentorship on so many levels is vitally important. Volunteers are really important. When I worked in youth sports, I was formerly the CEO of United States Youth Soccer Association, the largest youth sport organization in the country. And we had over 1 million volunteers. We had 3 million participants, but 1 million volunteers. Those volunteers ranged from team moms who were helping to transport athletes to the soccer pitch, or the team treasurer, or whomever. We literally could not successfully execute our sport without volunteers. And I would liken that to First as well. Students are mentored by engineers, by scientists, and other innovators from organizations like NASA and Boeing, 3M, RTX, and many leading technology companies. And students began to realize that engineers and scientists are not these abstract figures that they read about in textbooks, right? These are creative, collaborative, inspiring people who work in industry who are helping to solve real world problems in their organizations. And I think having those mentors lead teams and serve as role models is super important to the overall success of our program, but more importantly to the outlook that many of these students see for their own future careers, particularly in underserved parts of the country where students have mentors who are from their community, who maybe look the way they do, have similar backgrounds, really important. And at the end of the day, we could not do what we do at FIRST without volunteers and mentors, especially for programs like FIRST Robotics Competition that is so mentor intensive. We really need the support from volunteers who help students connect to something more meaningful and transformative.
Yeah. I'm always struck at SWE outreach events how much the students just want to hear people's stories. They just want to hear, what's the day in the life of working in the oil and gas industry or designing medical devices? What does that look like? What do you do? And how did you get into this? And I always tell our members, you don't know how many lives you might be changing just by telling your story. Someone who never saw themselves as an engineer is now thinking it's possible because they heard your story.
That's exactly right. And as you correctly pointed out earlier, students are forming their identity in STEM and having the opportunity to interface with these folks who work in industry, who are leaders in STEM, or who are, a leader in the military or a leader in business, really provides sort of a resonant example of what's possible. And to your point, students are really drawn to those stories.
Yeah. I think it was in one of the first videos, Chris, maybe last year or 2 years ago, where parents were talking about how FIRST had opened their children's eyes to the opportunities. And I remember one mom talking about, the only people my daughter knew were those who worked in things like cosmetology. And through her interaction with FIRST, like a whole nother world has opened up to her. And again, I think it's when our volunteers of both organizations talk about what they do and where they've come from and know they weren't hatched brilliant or as a leader. It took time and persistence, and it's okay that things are sometimes hard, but the reward is there. But I think it's when kids are exposed to the opportunities and the winding road it takes to get somewhere that the powerful things happen.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I have interacted with parents, attending local or regional or even our first world championship, or even when I've traveled internationally, where parents have approached me to say, you have no idea how much FIRST has changed my son or my daughter's life. And one moment that has stayed with me at a FIRST competition overseas, I was walking through the event when a woman from India approached me and asked if she could share a story about her daughter. She told me her daughter grew up in this small village near Mumbai and from a very young age loved building things. She said, she dreamed of becoming an engineer. More importantly, she said, her daughter wanted to help transform her community. And at some point, she had discovered FIRST and decided to start a FIRST team in her village. And as her mother described it, it became so much bigger than robotics. The students on her team, they learned how to collaborate. She said they learned how to experiment, how to, as we talked about before, how to fail and then try again, how to solve problems creatively, and how to build something meaningful together. And then she said, they started applying those skills to some real world issues that they saw around their own community. I think there were some like fresh water issues that she talked about. But what struck me most about what this mother said next, she said when her daughter later applied to colleges in the United States, nearly every major essay she wrote centered around her experience in FIRST. And you know how universities applications on the essays, they'll say, tell us who you are or what would you contribute to our campus community? Well, this mom told me that her daughter, literally every essay prompt she wrote about building as a FIRST team. She wrote about the leadership she learned from being part of FIRST. She wrote about how FIRST not only changed her life, but has started changing the lives of people around her. And the mother looked at me, she grabbed my arm, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, I just want you to understand that this program really transformed my daughter's life. Then she smiled and she said, and oh, by the way, my daughter got into Stanford University. So honestly, the Stanford acceptance wasn't even the most powerful part of the story to me. The powerful part was that somewhere along the way, this young woman stopped seeing herself simply as a student with a dream and started seeing herself as someone capable of building solutions, leading others, and really changing the trajectory of her community. And that's really the impact at first.
I was going to say she became a change maker.
100%.
Oh, that story gives me chills. That is the power of our programs, that it really does change lives. And it's that ability for the things we're doing to shift that mindset in young people from a dream to a reality, and from a young age building those skills.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, yes, first and SWE, we're teaching engineering and technology skills, but what we're really doing is we're helping young people discover confidence and identity and purpose and possibility. And we're helping them to realize that they are capable of shaping the future no matter where they come from. And when you see that happen firsthand, it just stays with you forever.
I always say increasing shareholder return is lovely, but advancing a mission like we have at SWE and FIRST, shareholder return just can't compete with that.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Well, Chris, we're kind of winding down to the end of our time here, but let's talk a little bit about the future. What excites you the most about the future of STEM? And maybe what role can today's engineers play in shaping that future for both the FIRST students, the SWE Nexters, all the young people that are out there?
Excellent question. What excites me most about the future of STEM is that learning is becoming far more connected to how innovation actually happens in the real world. The future can't simply be about students consuming information. Rather, it has to be about students building, testing, designing, collaborating, creating, and iterating. And the most powerful learning happens when young people are given real problems to solve and the freedom and the agency to explore and to experiment their way towards solutions. And that matters because the challenges this generation will inherit, from AI, cybersecurity to healthcare, energy, climate, will require people who can think critically, who can adapt quickly. We talked about who can fail safe, but then collaborate across disciplines to come up with solutions. And so at the same time, I think, demand for STEM talent will continue to grow while millions of jobs remain unfilled. So this isn't just about, an education issue, it's an economic and it's a societal issue as well. So I think engineers have an incredibly important role to play, not just as innovators, but as mentors, coaches, volunteers, and advocates for this next generation. And sometimes the most powerful thing that an engineer can do is simply show up in a young person's life, because, as we talked about before, mentorship and exposure matter. And many students just need someone to help them imagine themselves in these careers and say, you belong here. You can do this. You got this. And that's one of the reasons programs like FIRST and our partnership with SWE matter so much, because they connect students to real people, real pathways, and real opportunities. And honestly, I'm just incredibly, incredibly optimistic about this generation, because I see students every day who are creative, who are collaborative, adaptable, and deeply motivated to solve meaningful problems. And this generation is incredibly capable. And I think between FIRST and SWE, I think we're ensuring that these young people have the opportunities to discover and apply that capability. And that's what gives me hope.
And I just want to emphasize something you mentioned, Chris, when you mentioned advocacy, because I do think engineers have a really important role to play in advocating, even within their own communities, around STEM education and how are we teaching STEM? And like you said, are we making sure that there's those real world hands-on experiences for students? Are we making sure that after school programs like FIRST and SWE-NEXT are being supported? Because I think those in the profession have an obligation to advocate for the profession because they see the need. And I think they carry so much credibility that they don't realize they have to local legislators or running for the local school board or just being a vocal parent within the community. I think it's so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As they say, it takes a village to raise a young people. And I think what makes the partnership between FIRST and SWE so impactful is that at the core, we both believe the same fundamental thing, which is that every young person should have the opportunity to see themselves in STEM. And that's really the heart of it. And both of us are working to expand access and visibility, mentorship, and we're advocating, as you noted, and giving young people the opportunity to imagine a future for themselves as engineers, as technologists, as leaders. And that's the power in what we both do.
Yeah, there isn't an industry or branch of government or institution that isn't going to need people with engineering, technology, science, those critical thinking skills. Because as you said, we have a lot of grand challenges we're going to be leaving these generations with, and we're going to need everybody to help solve them.
Yeah, and what I really love about the work that SWE does is, I mean, you guys are bringing an extraordinary network of mentors and professionals and advocates who are helping students see what's possible beyond the classroom or competition field. And I think the opportunity ahead of us, both of us, is enormous, especially in underserved communities and emerging technology areas like AI, robotics, and advanced manufacturing.
Absolutely. I think the need has never been greater. So the work that both our organizations do is critical to that as a country if we are going to remain competitive and safe.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, thank you again so much for being here. Just to make sure our listeners know that FIRST and SWE has had a formal partnership for a number of years now. We have an MOU and we work together not just leading up to championships, but year round working together to really help young people develop those STEM identities.
That's right. And I love working with you and your team and really admire you for, all that you do and the leadership you provide to FIRST. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you again. And I'm Karen Horting. And from all of us at SWE, thanks for listening.